Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for our panel, Seed to Plate, Evolving Sustainable Agricultural for Healthy Communities, sponsored by the College of Natural Sciences. Today's discussion is with industry experts who will reveal how farming approaches have changed and how UMass faculty and alumni are evolving concepts of sustainability. Our panelists today will discuss innovation in sustainable farming, challenges faced in the industry, and the workings of the UMass Student Farm and Farm Share CSA program. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded. Attendees are on mute and cameras are off. By participating in this session, you are consenting to being in a recorded session. After the recording is made, it will be captioned and all registrants will be notified when the recording is available online for future viewing. Participants are invited to submit questions for discussion through the Q&A feature, not the chat. Following the presentation, the panelists will do their best to answer as many questions as possible in the time allotted. Now, I am pleased to introduce our panelists, both alumni of the university. Amanda Brown is currently the director of the UMass Student Farm and Enterprise Program and the Stockbridge School of Agriculture's Agricultural Learning Center. Amanda joined the Stockbridge faculty after working with UMass Extension program for over a decade. Dr. John Purcell has dedicated over 3 years to helping farmers. He currently serves as the Vegetable Seed Research and Development Lead and Senior Vice President for Bayer Crop Science. Prior to his role at Bayer, John had a long career in the Monsanto Technology Organization and was a postdoctoral researcher at the United States Department of Agriculture. We are pleased to have them here with us today. Welcome, Amanda and John, and thank you for taking the time to share your expertise with us. John, we're going to start with you today.
Okay.
Great. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Diane. Thanks to Julie, thanks to the organizers, and thanks to Amanda for sharing the stage today, virtual stage, if you will. It's always great as an alum, and my wife is also an alum of UMass, to reconnect with the UMass community, and especially on such an important topic as food and sustainability. And I've spent the last 30 years in agriculture, 30 years plus in agriculture, and it's something I feel very, very passionate about. I am not one who came into agriculture as a farm kid. Actually, I'm a native Washingtonian. We do exist, born in Washington, D.C., 4th generation D.C. native. But I also spent time during summers on my aunt's corn and soybean farm on the Chesapeake Bay. And for me, that was really a formative time. And anybody that grows up in the area remembers growing up in the 60s, especially Save the Bay. You see those bumper stickers everywhere. But I think the Chesapeake Bay is a great microcosm of really some of the challenges, where you have this amazing natural resource that's cherished by so many people, and you have agriculture all around it. There's a lot of production on the Eastern Shore, on the northern neck of Virginia, et cetera. And then a very rapidly growing urban population with all the pressures that. And so the Bay is just really kind of a symbol of how we have to figure out the balance between growth, having livelihoods for people, and agriculture, and then preserving nature. And to me, that's part of my DNA, if you will. My time at UMass was awesome. I had the great honor and pleasure of working under Jack Norden in the biochemistry department. And also, I split my time actually between Jack's lab and Joe Kunkel's lab in entomology. So my work was in insect biochemistry under the molecular and cellular biology umbrella. But Jack was amazing. He's an amazing man, an amazing scientist. But he, for me, what was cool about it was Jack not only had his academic research going on, but he also was working on real world problems like Dutch elm disease. And so for me, that really got me on a track to think about, as much as I love science, technology was really my driver. How do we use science to provide real world solutions? So as I said, I went to the USDA after UMass and then spent 30 years, over 30 years now, first at Monsanto and now at Bayer Crop Science. And I've had worked in corn, cotton, wheat, and for the last decade in the vegetable space. And veggies is a really cool world. I got a great job. I basically fly around the world helping farmers grow veggies. But veggies is cool because it's not only obviously important for agriculture, but there's such a great connectivity with society on food. And it's an important conversation to have like the one we're having today. I also have been honored to be on farms in over 35 countries. And that's really cool because it gives you a perspective on just how many different types of operations, how farmers and ranchers around the world. And I think there's two things that, as I find, farmers and ranchers share around the world. One is their commitment to sustainability, not just for their current production or the current season, but really for generations, doing what they need to do to be as sustainable as possible. And I think the second is the challenges they face. They all need innovation. They all need solutions. They all need technology to help them, no matter what market they choose to participate in. For me, agriculture isn't just a professional pursuit, it's also personal. I'm part owner of a family ranching operation in Montana. My brother is the principal owner and the majority owner and operator. He's been out there over 40 years now. We're small by Montana standards, 200 acres, but it's all local production. So pork, hemp, Christmas trees. We also do recreational uses on the ranch as well. So really a pretty diverse operation. But for me, that's really important because it helps me stay grounded on where on the challenges farmers and ranchers face. Trying to stay in business every year, and to me, that's really an important theme. So when I think about sustainability, and let's focus on the farm, and let's think about the produce sector. For me, one of the things that's quite remarkable about the produce industry is the diversity of production and production systems in play. I just think about my farmer customers. I mean, I've got a customer 10 acres on Maui, 100% organic. I've got customers with 1,000 acres in Salinas Valley, California, supplying all the major retailers around the country. I've got high-tech glasshouse growers in places like the Netherlands and parts of Canada and parts of the US. Got greenhouse growers, smallholder farmers in India, and even new emerging markets like vertical farms. I think all of those farmers are important in this greater ecosystem around produce and how we provide produce to the world. And I think one of the things I want to encourage you to think about, each of them have a different story to tell around sustainability. And sometimes we think about models or only certain types of farming we think of sustainable. But if you think about those large growers with 1,000+ acres, they're able to make capital investments, in new systems for irrigation or other methods of crop management that smaller growers may not do, that are incredibly sustainable. Think about glasshouse growers. Glasshouse growers of tomatoes now in the Netherlands are getting over 100 kilograms per meter squared. It's the way they measure it in glasshouse production. That's a lot of tomatoes. I don't get that in my garden, I'll tell you that. But what's cool about that, that's a lot of production in a very small space. So from a sustainability standpoint, that production per acre is extremely high. And also they can use really high-tech approaches to water management, energy management, et cetera, et cetera. And then, the vertical farms, obviously incredibly technically advanced with the robotics, the automation, indoor farming, another term for vertical farming. But again, it's hyper-local, which has incredible appeal from the sustainability. So when I think about sustainability, I think we need to recognize that no matter what the type of grower, it's not just the kind of typical growers you might think about from a sustainability standpoint, but many growers, no matter what system they're using, are employing, and they all have different advantages on how they think about sustainability. And I do want to encourage people to also, when you think about sustainability, I always want to include in one part of sustainability as a requirement, and that is economic sustainability for the farmer and rancher. There's just tremendous challenges and pressures on the farming and ranching community. So we need to include that economic sustainability for the producer in as we think about sustainability. Let's think about sustainability at the consumer level. when I'm going to age myself here, born in the 50s and raised in the 60s. When I was a kid, my parents, we only got certain fruits and veggies certain times a year. Oh, it's peach season. Oh, it's tomato season, etc. Now, I mean, let's be honest, we're spoiled, right? We want good tasting stuff. We want it convenient. We want it year round, which puts a lot of pressure on the production of having that year round supply of fresh, delicious, nutritious fruits and vegetables. And then there's another trend happening at the consumer level from a sustainability standpoint. And that's it. Consumers, especially Western Europe and US, et cetera, and other places where you have very developed markets from a retail perspective, they're asking other questions besides, does it taste good? Is it convenience, et cetera? They're asking more fundamental questions. Questions like, where was this food produced? How was it produced? Who grew it? And these are that connectivity people have with the farm, and it gets down then to the traceability and the transparency, so you can try to provide that kind of information so people can make decisions on that food. And it comes down to really that personal relationship with food, especially when it comes to produce. And there's a reason why virtually every grocery store you go into, what's the first department you walk into in most places? Produce, right? And so, that's where it's because it's a very sensory experience. You want to see it, you want to touch it, you want to smell it. It's all the things that comes with produce. Although with e-retail, that's a little different now, but I think there is a real personal relationship, and that's a good thing. And I think this conversation we're having about where our food comes from, how it's produced, is a good thing, because it allows us to really talk about what happens on farms. But there's the reality where, in the US, 1 to 2% of the population is engaged in food production, and the other 99% are putting pictures of food on Instagram or Facebook, et cetera. Besides kittens, right? It's like the biggest thing on the internet is food. So it's like, there's this conversation going on about what we want our food supply to look like. And that's a good conversation, but we got to be honest with ourselves. There's also some disconnect, between what happens on the farm and how that's maybe perceived. And so we got to do a much better job on that transparency and communications and also the traceability. So we ensure people that they know where their food comes from and how it was produced. And there are some technologies that are coming on board in that respect. I think about technologies like blockchain, which and other traceability things for produce. In many cases, the initial intent of that was around food safety. You want to make sure you know where the food comes from, how it's produced. And then it's evolved, though, where it's become really trying to provide information on that how, where, and who. And so that's a cool thing for consumers to get more information. And e-retail helps that, because if you can see and what the specifics of a certain product is online before you buy it. CSAs and farmers markets are great, because you can definitely, in many cases, you'll meet the actual farmer, and the CSA, you're contracting with the direct farmer. And then QR codes on produce are becoming bigger and bigger, where you can get your smartphone, get out, and you can see more information about where that produce comes from. But a lot of these are still in development. They're not really providing all the information consumers look for, which creates a dynamic where instead, when you don't have specific information, you look for general things, and you look for local, organic, family owned. And the challenge is people then equate those directly with sustainability. And in many cases they are, but maybe they are, maybe they aren't, and in the absence of knowing specifically on every bit of produce you buy, that's where those labels become like a substitute for that specific information. I look at my brother's ranch, and he does an amazing job. And people come and say, oh, this is the way food should be produced. It's small, local, family owned, check the box, check the box, check the box. You don't know that's sustainable. I mean, I know it because I know what he does. And in fact, he was bragging a little, my brother. He was awarded an award by the Governor Bullock at the governor's mansion for the land use and stewardship initiatives on his ranch. But I think people use that as the saying, this is how I want my food produced, which is in many cases correct, but until we have the traceability and the kind of information provided so people can see there are other models. It doesn't have to be small, local, family owned, other models of sustainability. Some of which I was pointing out earlier around, glass houses and vertical farms and big producers. And I'm gonna give you an example, just kind of challenge your thinking on this scale and large size. And this is an operation in the UK called Staples Vegetables, not Staples the office store, Staples Vegetables, 10,000 acres. Huge producer of brassica crops. And they supply, major retailers. May not think about sustainability, think about that. But let me tell you about their operation. So they harvest their broccoli. If you've ever been to, and that all goes to the source. If you've ever been to a broccoli field after it's been harvested, you might look and go, wow, did they harvest this? Because there's a lot of broccoli left because it didn't meet spec or wasn't quite mature, et cetera. But also there's a lot of biomass left. So a lot of that plant still in the field besides the head of broccoli that was harvested. So what do? They come back and harvest all that biomass. Why? Because they built anaerobic digestion plants at their facilities. The anaerobic digestion plant then creates electricity, powers their entire operation. They're 100% green electric. They then create enough electricity to sell back to the grid. The CO2 that's produced in that process goes back out to their greenhouses. The slurry that's left at the end of the digestion goes out into the field as fertilizer. The heat that's generated is actually converted to refrigeration to cool the produce before it ships to the field. So let's think about that. Food waste, CO2, energy. I mean, everything is part of that equation. So what definition of sustainability wouldn't that fit, right? And so that's why I think really think about how some of the advantages of large operations can have from a sustainability perspective. Advantage of scale, they need that scale of thousands of acres in order to keep those anaerobic digestion plants running. And advantage of capital. They're able to make investments like anaerobic digestion, other kinds of things, other big investments on irrigation, advanced irrigation, digital tools, et cetera. Those are all things that major producers are doing now to address the sustainability issue. I just give that as an example to kind of think about, how we think about sustainability maybe in a little different light. So final thoughts. My ask as I think about, things you learn at UMass, be open-minded. Think about, when you think about sustainability in agriculture, recognize sustainability can come in many shapes and sizes, no matter what kind of producer is aiming for their sustainability. Don't just rely on your preconceptions, and as the industry provides more information, I think you're gonna find some really cool stories about sustainable practices in play. And the other piece, I love technology. I'm not an apologist, I will say I love technology. Technology, innovation really can play a major role in delivering on sustainability initiatives and other types of things that consumers are looking for in our modern food supply. Final thought, agriculture is a big tent, right? And for me, like I said, I have customers of all ilk, of all types, all sizes. I think we all need to work to support farmers and ranchers of all sizes and all production types. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much for this opportunity and look forward to the Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you, John, so very much. And certainly we look forward to the Q&A as well. So again, as a reminder, please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A feature and not the chat. So again, thank you. So now, Amanda, we would love to hear from you. And we see that you are actually not on the farm and she's taken a break from not being in the field to being with us today. So Amanda, thank you so very much.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Yes, I am not on the farm today. We had at the farmhouse a little internet. The internet was down today, so I'm actually in the Page Lab conference room, and I have Levi Stockbridge behind me today supporting me. So thank you for having me, and thank you, John. It's fascinating to hear your point of view and how many similarities we actually have coming from such a different lens when we're looking at agriculture. Just here in Massachusetts, we have about 7,200 farms, which average about $65,000 a year on just 68 acres. So to hear you say, 200 acre farms and thinking about the agricultural world in which you come from versus us is really interesting to hear all those similarities. And so my work primarily focuses on training beginning farmers. So folks who haven't necessarily come from family farms, but who want to be part of the sustainability movement in some way, and they want to be part of the food system. And so they're looking for ways to get experience, gaining some hands-on skills in agriculture, but also to gain an understanding of what it actually takes to produce food. And so we kind of start our educational journey with undergraduates here at the university by looking at agriculture in the big picture in the United States. And so, you know, we've all sort of watched the family farm phenomenon decline with some concern. You know, it's no secret that the average age of today's farmer is 58 years old. And as John had mentioned, only makes up about 1.3% of the population in the United States. And so when you look at those statistics, what it's really telling us is that this pipeline of food producers is actually emptying a lot faster than it's being refilled. And so while my mission in the world is not to create 1 million farmers on the planet, but instead to certainly give skills to those who want to be food producers, but also just to inform the general public about the importance of supporting local healthy food systems and what is sustainability and how can we build better communities for ourselves. And so when we think about the scary statistics of sort of what's happening in the US, I do have hope in that consumer demand is really creating a lot of opportunity for our students. And so here in the Northeast, we're seeing demand for local foods is certainly on the rise, whether it's in restaurants or hospitals, schools. There's certainly an opportunity because our consumers are saying, we want this. As John had mentioned, the traceability piece is huge, where people are demanding to know who's producing what they're consuming. And so I think also given the current climate with the COVID-19 pandemic, what we've seen is that our society is really very dependent upon what I guess has traditionally been seen as these blue collar industries. Transportation in particular is playing a key role in getting the food to us that we need. And so we take this approach, this lens at looking at the entire system. Our systems thinking includes all the players that are involved, whether it's the growers, the truck drivers, the buyers, the chefs, everybody's involved in this whole system, and most importantly, our consumers. And so we like to think about the consumer as really the driving force. And so that includes all of us. We all have to eat. We talk often about, you know, when our students are choosing their careers, having conversations with their family about the importance of food and how, you know, how many times did you eat today and where did that product come from? And so, you know, when we're, so we have this sort of big picture scope of the food system in the country, and then we sort of take it down onto smaller, more digestible levels. And when we're talking about sustainability, I completely agree with John that the economics and farm viability is very important, because without that, our farms just can't go on. And so we have the 3 pillars of sustainability that we talk about to include environmental consciousness, economic viability, and then social equity and access for all participants in our community. And so just to break that down, you know, if we're thinking about our environmental aspect of sustainability, why local food is important, some of the ways in which we can combat some of our environmental impacts that agriculture has is local agriculture is cutting down on our transportation costs, which are usually heavily oil dependent, reducing our carbon footprint. And when done right, our local agriculture here in the Northeast is protecting our local landscapes and ecosystems. Local agriculture certainly helps to keep our money local. We're creating jobs for people on farms. And also, one thing that we're seeing is our graduates are fulfilling roles beyond just working on a farm. So they're working as produce purchasers, maybe as food safety inspectors. They're working for the Mass Department of Agricultural Resources. There's certainly a lot of career opportunities that become aware to them from just working on the farm, because, you know, that the understanding of what it actually takes to get that product to the dinner table, there's a long chain in there, even when we're talking about local production there. But we're trying to sort of make that chain of distribution a little bit shorter. And then the equitable piece, we find that our local agriculture really ensures that fresh, healthy food stays available to our local community members as much as possible. And we also, one part that we do here, and I'll talk a little bit more about the ins and outs of the Student Farm program, but one thing that we're very proud of that I wanted to bring up is our Student Farm Food Access Initiative program, where we are under that umbrella. That was a student-driven idea. Not only are we doing food donations from our production fields, but we're also doing educational programming, and creating resources for our students on campus who are identifying as food insecure. We're working with our local hunger relief agencies to make gardens on their facilities, also work with their patrons to get more food and do some gardening workshops. So there's a lot of interest among our student body on social justice and equity. And so we're really trying to honor that desire that our students have and make a difference in our community and give them those skills to be prepared for careers that address those issues when they leave UMass. And so another thing that, since I am an alumni as well, very proud, stocky over here. And I did want to give, I know a lot, we have a lot of alum here with us today, and I just wanted to give you a few updates because things may be a little bit different than the last time you were here. So this Stockbridge School of Agriculture now offers bachelor's degrees. Back in October, we were ranked 4th in the world for a top agricultural university from the US News and World Report, and also 2nd in the United States. In 2013, the Stockbridge School started offering bachelor's degrees. So now you can earn a 4-year degree in horticultural science, plant, soil, and insect science, sustainable food and farming, turf grass science management. And also we still offer associate degrees in arboriculture and community forest management, landscape contracting, sustainable food and farming, sustainable horticulture, and turf grass management. And we also offer a non-degree certificate in sustainable food and farming. When I was a Stockbridge student, I graduated in 2000, and there were about 90 turf grass majors, and there were 5 fruit and veg majors. And today we have about 200 students in the sustainable food and farming majors. So our numbers in comparison to the nursing program or chemistry are still relatively small, but in terms of growth are phenomenal. We're very proud of that. Our in-person, we have about 100 students on campus and about 100 online. And so we're very proud of that. So within the Sustainable Food and Farming program is housed the Stockbridge School, the UMass Student Farming Enterprise program. And so I just wanted to read to you the mission statement that our students developed, and I'll tell you a little bit about the history of that program. As UMass student farmers, we commit to providing our campus community with nutritious, organically grown local produce. We cultivate student empowerment through hands-on agricultural production and by educating our peers about the importance of creating a healthier food system. In 2007, the Student Farming Enterprise Program was created to give our students an opportunity to have more hands-on learning. And we had, at the time I was working for the UMass Extension program as an extension educator, working with organic vegetable growers throughout the state and doing research at our agronomy farm out in South Deerfield. And we had access to land and we had access to students who said, I want to learn how to drive a tractor. I want to learn how to take a soil test. And we were able to work with 2 students through an independent study to give them some kind of basic skills. And they said, well, we wanted to experiment with growing things and selling them on campus. So that is really the beginning of what has turned into a much larger beginning farmer training program. And so after that first year, more students heard about what we were doing, more students wanted to get involved. The year after that, more students wanted to get involved. The dining halls caught wind of what we were doing and said, we would love to buy some produce. And so as the enrollment numbers for the sustainable food and farming major continued to grow, so did interest in the student farm program. And so now, fast forward, we are in our 14th season. And our program is year-long, so it's designed for students to apply during the fall semester. If they're accepted, they enroll starting in January, and they do all of the planning for a 21-acre certified organic vegetable farm. After the spring semester, they leave with their plan, and then in the summer, they implement the plan that they create during the spring semester, and in the fall, they enroll again for academic credit and do all of the harvesting, the post-harvest care, the marketing, and the financial analysis of their season. So we try as best we can to expose students to all aspects of running a small diversified vegetable and meat farm. We have about 15 to 20 students a year. If they complete the entire program, they receive 12 academic credits. And yeah, I guess this is our third year of raising broiler hens and sheep, and we are moving into pig production pretty soon. And we have about 10 different markets that we sell to. We run a 150 member CSA program. We sell a lot to UMass Dining, to catering, some on-campus student-run cafes, as well as a local grocery chain here, Big Y Foods, which owns about 72 stores. And we've developed a wonderful relationship with that company that has allowed our students to have an extremely unique opportunity to work directly with produce purchasers in a very respectable, real wholesale market chain. And so what we've tried to do is establish these markets to give our students the experience they need to navigate all of those different markets. So we have retail, direct to consumer, and wholesale operations. We also run a farmer's market every week. When our students come to the farm, one thing that John and I had talked about when we had met a few weeks ago is that our students, some have very little, if any, experience working on a farm. Some have never even operated a power drill. For some of them, this is their first employment. And so we really start with the basics of the skill sets that are needed. Our students get to do transplant production in greenhouses. They have tractor safety training. They get to operate the equipment. They do all the planting, the weeding, the pest management, post-harvest care. They run a industry standard wash and pack station. And so I think one of the biggest learnings that they gain after the end of the program is really growing plants seems to be the easier part of it, where working in a group, navigating different skills that they need, marketing skills are some of the more challenging things. And so our farm operates as sort of a hybrid for-profit educational farm where students receive academic credit, which sometimes can contradict itself. The educational nature of the farm lends itself to mistakes, which is where most of the learning actually takes place, but is certainly an area which makes it challenging. And so I guess the approach that we've used to really teach our students is threefold, and where we give them access. So the three sort of components are access, mentorship, and empowerment. And so the access piece is that because agriculture is, the agricultural science are so hands-on, which is why we love being in the Stockbridge School, where that sort of experiential learning is just the nature of what this school has always stood for. But we give them access, direct access to the farm, to the equipment, to the greenhouse, to the tools, to each other, so that they can learn how to really get their hands dirty, literally, and get a chance to operate this equipment and learn from their mistakes, learn from what they did correctly. The other piece that is really important and is really my job is this strong mentorship piece. I am with them a lot. We spend on academic time about 10 hours a week together during the spring semester. We're on the farm at least 50 hours a week all summer. And then in the fall semester, they're with me about 14 hours a week. And so we get a lot of time together. They get a lot of time with their small group of 20. And I think part of that experience that we're able to give them is also extremely unique in that they're learning not only from me, but from other faculty on campus, from our industry professionals at the soils lab, at the diagnostics lab, with the UMass Extension, and with all of the wonderful growers that we have here in the Pioneer Valley. This is a wonderful place to come and study agriculture because there is just so much here, so many wonderful people that you can learn from. So we do have our students go out and do service learning on both conventional and organic farms so that they can get a sense of, how are all these, there's certainly not one way to farm. There's a million different ways. And so it's really, we're very fortunate in that we have this amazing platform for inquiry here in the Pioneer Valley for agriculture. The last piece is student empowerment. And so our students, when they start in January and I say, we're gonna start a farm, and they wait for me to tell them what to do. And when I don't, they get very concerned about their ability. And, I've never done this before. How are we gonna figure this out? And so taking it in digestible, very small steps, they do it. And so that's the empowerment piece. By November, really by September, October, November, after they've been on the farm and they see like, wow, the spreadsheet that we made in January that said we were gonna have 2,000 pounds of broccoli, we actually did that. And it's their experience that really lends itself to that tangible learning that you can't gain from a textbook that we are able to provide them with. And so I am very lucky because I have a really wonderful job. I get to work with some of the most dedicated students. They're all wonderful. We've had about 160 students come through our program, and some move on to start farms on their own. Some move on to take managerial positions. Some work on farms. Some have taken up professions with nonprofit organizations or policy driven. Certainly education's a big avenue in which people go. And now that, our first, second, third, fourth generation folks who have come through the program, they're the ones that are really at a point now where they're sort of taking that leap to leasing land or land ownership and starting businesses on their own. And certainly we have some who come through and say, oh, I lost my light. Who say, I am not interested in farming anymore. This is not something I want to do. And that's okay too. Our main goal is that people leave the program with an understanding of what it actually takes to produce food from seed to plate. And while we can't teach them everything about farming in 10 months, we certainly hope they gain an understanding of community, environmental stewardship, and what it takes to run a viable farm operation. And so in closing, I just would say thank you for having me. And I guess I'll open it up to questions at this time. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amanda. Before we actually open the Q&A, we would love the opportunity to show your latest video about the farm, because it's always wonderful for people to visually see the behind the scenes video. So we'd like to play that now, and then we'll move into Q&A. And again, just a reminder, if you do have questions, please submit them in the Q&A feature, and we will get to those as soon as the video concludes.
The primary focus of the Agricultural Learning Center is an outdoor laboratory. The agricultural programming that's happening here is just slightly delayed and is going to look different, but will continue. So the pandemic has affected the Agricultural Learning Center by not allowing us to have our students on the farm right now. And we typically employ 6 to 10 students full-time. the essential staff that are working here right now are keeping things going until our students can safely return to the farm. The nature of the Student Farming Enterprise course is that when students begin the program in January, they do all the planning for the farm. And so we had just completed our farm plan. So we're really trying to honor the work that they've done. We're doing the best that we can to keep them involved through Zoom and other social media platforms so that they can still understand the process and the beginning steps of producing food for their community. The bulk of our production plan really happens in July, and so we're hoping that our crew of 6 to 10, still to be determined, will be able to return at that point because we're going to need them. The heart and soul of farming itself is that we're constantly adjusting, we're constantly changing things. Things rarely go to plan, and that's okay. People need food. We're going to grow food to give our students that experience, but to become food producers or part of the food system when they leave the University of Massachusetts.
Great. That was a wonderful video. And I know, Amanda, a number of participants have expressed interest in learning about the CSA program when they registered. So for those individuals, we will contact you with that information. But what is the best way for someone to learn about the CSA program?
I would say the best way to learn about our CSA program is to visit our website. If you go to the Stockbridge School of Agriculture's website and you go to Student Life, you can find the Student Farm. There's a bunch of information up there about how to go about signing up and also some updates from our farmers. Another great way is just to follow us on our social media platforms, including Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you so very much, Amanda and John, for being with us today. And now I would like to get to kind of the exciting portion of the questions and answers that have been coming in. So for our Q&A. So we will try to get to as many questions as we can in the time allowed, and then we can answer some of those questions offline as well. But John, we have a couple for you. It sounds like there are a number of people who are really interested in the broccoli farm example that you gave. And one of the questions is there a minimal scale necessary for AD to be economically viable?
Yeah, I think the there are smaller operations, smaller facilities that can be built, but I think the one of the keys for the Staples example was having enough biomass to actually drive it, because when you're thinking about a plant, and it's all depending on how much energy you want to generate, right? But I think the scale at which they wanted to power their whole operation, they needed that scale. So yeah, there are unfortunately some minimal things for some of these investments you need to make. But I do think there's some ways to get there. One is from the investment side, we're seeing governments respond and incentivize and actually subsidize some of these kinds of programs. There are programs in the UK, programs in the US to help absorb some of those early costs. And then the more these are built, you'll see the cost of the structures actually and facilities actually come down, which is a good thing. It's a great use of government funding. I think the other thing is from scale perspective, this is where co-ops are important. I got a lot of customers who are part of co-ops. And I think whether it be marketing or whether it be trying to make investments, co-ops can really be a great way for farmers to come together and pool their resources so that they can actually make the scale of that investment. But there are other ways to think about the basic equation, whether it comes to waste and energy, et cetera, beyond just kind of the large scale that Staples employed. But in that kind of scenario, yes, there are definitely scale that you have to hit. But I think, as they say, pooling your resource with our growers is one way to do that, to make sure you meet that. And I think government assistance is another way, because it's a great way to deal with a lot of the challenges across the board from a sustainability perspective. And I think that's what government should be subsidized when we think about some of these new technologies.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. So this question is for actually both of you. And just wondering if either of you or both of you could touch on climate change and its impact on agriculture in general, as well as sustainable farming.
Sure, I can tell you what we're seeing are just absolute extremes here. So it's been hot and dry. We haven't just in thinking about today, it's been hot and dry here, like in the 90s, which is not too characteristic for early June here, and we haven't seen any rain for a number of weeks, and we are forecasted to rain this entire week. And so we've spent countless hours trying to figure out how to get water on our fields. And now this is the big joke of irrigation. I'm sure you know this, John. If you get the irrigation guns out, it starts raining.
Right.
And so we've been sort of trying to figure out ways to address climate change in that let's not try and conquer it. We need to figure out how to adjust and adapt our systems, because it looks like these extremes from what the climate change models predict is that we're going to have more extremes. And so, how are we going to develop our systems? We're currently on one of our sites, for example, that's very sloped and heavy clay soils. We have a lot of runoff. And so we're looking at stormwater collection and how are we going to divert some of the water without destroying the ecosystems that are there and the wetlands that are already there. And so it's been a great learning experience for our students to walk onto a piece of property and just, and have the conversation of like, well, why can't we just put a pipe in and divert the stormwater? Well, we can't, because there's a Wetland Protection Act on that property. And, then, having them be involved in the meetings with the town conservation committee is just a huge learning, like things you would never think of, that again, this is connected to food production. And so we can't plow up that land right there because it's dry because it's going to affect this system. And so, yeah, we're really, I think what farmers do best, like I said in the video, is adapt. And so we're certainly trying to figure out how to deal with the extremes. And really that's sort of been our biggest thing, is trying to stay ahead of the weather patterns, or at least come up with a contingency plan when things don't go the way that we think they're going to.
Yeah, man, Mandy hit on a lot of really important points. And I think despite what you might hear from some addresses in my hometown of DC, climate change is real and it's having a huge impact on agriculture. I mean, all of us who are in agriculture, you see it every day. We're seeing pests where you didn't see them before. We're seeing, just as Amanda pointed out, dramatic extremes of water, either plus or minus, too much water, too little water, temperature extremes, et cetera. So I'd say it's the number one challenge facing agriculture, and you could argue the number one challenge facing the globe at this point. I do think there's a lot of adaptability, as Amanda pointed out, but we've got to do everything we can as far as providing solutions. For me, on the seed part of the business, thinking about seed that have more abiotic resistance, we do that every day. Thinking about how do we have varieties that grow better under extreme conditions. Thinking about digital tools to help growers manage their crop more effectively, so that they can use their water most efficiently, have better weather information to help drive and soil information to help drive how they manage their farms. And then it gets down to, as Amanda was pointing out, agronomic practices. And there are limits to what you can do with some of the extremes we're seeing, but farmers and ranchers are amazing on that agronomic practice side. But this is all hands on deck. I mean, it's that severe. Technology can help, agronomic solutions can help, but the problem is the rate at which we're seeing these changes is really swamping a lot of the innovations we're trying to bring. As far as getting them quick enough, we just can't get there quick enough, just because the changes are so dramatic at this point.
Wow, well, thank you so much for that insight. We certainly know that that's one of the biggest challenges, facing industries such as yours. So we're living in an interesting time, obviously, with our pandemic. And, we've heard, Amanda, a little bit from you in terms of how your thinking and planning has shifted kind of in response to that. We do have a question very much about food chain, and through the COVID-19 pandemic process, we've had an abundance of all food types that needed to be thrown away due to numerous reasons. I think we've all heard that on the news. I assume that we as a country have had time to review and better protect all farming products, meats, vegetables, and dairy going forward. So can you speak a little bit about that? Because, I think it is disheartening for a lot of us on the consumer side to see these, just the amount of food that is being wasted and thrown away. So would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the meat industry is kind of a separate issue with some of the some of the issues within the packing plants, et cetera. But let me focus on produce, because the question we get a lot is how are we throwing away produce when people need food and food banks, et cetera. The challenge was this: for growers that were supplying direct to retail or farmers markets or CSAs, those markets actually did really well. In fact, I'm proud to be part of an industry that actually did well supplying produce. But for a lot of growers who were basically their production was geared toward food service, schools, restaurants, companies that had make large purchases of food. All that food, all that produce was available, but it wasn't destined for direct consumer. And so that's where the challenge was on the repurposing. Some of it was the choice of crops, but in many cases, it literally was down to when the scale of things and how much, but also even the packaging and how do you actually get it into forms that would be amenable to donation to food banks or getting out into farmers markets. I will say both at federal and state level, there were responses helping growers reposition and remarket those materials. But part of it is, these supply chains have been built for many years. And that's one of the reasons, and they're very effective and very efficient. It's one of the reasons why in the US, we have one of the lowest costs of food per income of any nation in the world, because we have very supply chains that are very efficient. But at times like this, you need flexibility, you need agility. And that's where the challenge came in, like I say, but the federal and state programs are kicking in now to try to repurpose that. But there were some basic challenges because, as I say, just the types of crops that were grown, the way they were grown, and even simple things like the packaging, get into individual packaging versus things that were flowing into the food service. And those were some of the biggest challenges from a produce perspective, but some of that is being corrected, but it's a pretty big deal to try to reconfigure the supply chain.
Absolutely. Amanda, did you have any thoughts on that, even from a local perspective?
I guess I would just echo what John said. It's not my area of expertise, but the produce purchasers that we work with, kind of said the same thing in that there's, because we were hearing from some of our local hunger relief agencies that they were having, in some ways, having trouble finding stuff, and in other ways getting flooded with things. And so it just seemed like a wrench was thrown into the entire system. And, when we're thinking about the systems, the transportation piece, all of those different things, when they get stressed or, there's extra load on them, that's where things start to fall apart, like John said. And so, and I'm even just thinking from folks who purchase from us, our production has been delayed since our labor force was delayed. And so they're looking for other places and to support their families with local food. And I think what this has really shown is that our sort of reliance on these systems that aren't perfect, that have been perfect until something goes awry, really show us why we need to support local farmers, and because that's where we all went. And so, yeah, I think I would just kind of echo what John said. It's educating yourself about the bigger piece and all of the parts that go into getting the food to where it needs to go. There's a lot. It's very complex.
And Amanda, I'm glad you brought up the labor, because that was really been interesting. I know on our farms, about 40 farms around the world, we've kept them going because we need seed going to the growers. But we've had to do much more shift work, spacing on our planters, masks and distancing, and the producers are all doing these same things. So it's been quite remarkable to see how much food is still flowing, considering the distancing and other conditions we had to respond to. And growers have done an amazing job of keeping produce flowing under pretty obviously dramatic circumstances.
Wonderful. Obviously, the pandemic is still here. We don't know what that future looks like, but knowing now kind of where we have been and not knowing where we're going, in all honesty. What are some of the other things that you're concerned about, moving forward and, with labor supply chain and, from a consumer and wholesale perspective?
Well, I guess I would say for us, we're just still trying to, even this morning, today was our first day of having half of our crew come back, and we're just trying to adjust to something that's constantly adjusting. And so I think the logistics of day-to-day life is still a challenge, just personally and professionally. And I think we're putting these systems into place. And I will say that here in the Valley, it's been amazing to watch growers adapt to not having their farm stands open, to not having the restaurants that they need to sell to shifting to online ordering and delivery, to collaborating with one another, making sure that a diversity of products can be brought to one location with one pickup in one box. And it's really been inspiring to see the ingenuity of our farmers as displaying all the many hats that they have to wear. So you're not just a food grower, you're a marketer, you're a software engineer now, you're all of these different things that got thrown into the mix, a mechanic. And so it's just been, in a way, hopeful to see that things still go in the ground, food's still growing, where in the beginning it was much more gloom and doom. And so there's a lot of fear out there, and we're, just kind of moving forward. And like I said, it's going to look different, but it's still going to happen. So, yeah, I'm trying to stay hopeful and positive. That's my
I'm with you, Amanda. And I think the other thing to recognize, you got to remember the same farmer ranching families are also dealing with the issues everybody else dealing with. The schools aren't in, daycare isn't there, summer camps aren't there. So they're dealing with the challenges we all face, but then they're also trying to supply the world with food. So it's quite remarkable, and our hats off to all of them, because it's been amazing to see how food production has maintained, and it really still, you can still get fresh produce, it's quite remarkable considering the conditions they're working under.
Well, we certainly thank you and all of our farmers and all of our suppliers, because we all individually benefit for our own personal lives and our own families. So thank you for all that hard work, for being out in those fields on days when we're inside enjoying our own cool temperatures. So, well, our time has concluded today. And again, thank you, John and Amanda. We are truly grateful. It was a great opportunity to hear from you. Thank you to all of our participants for joining us today. There were questions that we were not able to get to, and we will try to answer some of those questions offline. You will receive a follow-up email survey. We hope you'll take a few minutes to complete it and share your feedback and ideas for future webinar topics. Again, living in the virtual world, we are always looking for ways to keep conversations going, to be hopeful and really address some of the concerns that we all have on our minds. And until we can be together, we hope that you all stay well. And thank you again for everyone's time today.
Thank you so much. Great to be back with UMass.
Well, we look forward to having you back on campus when it's safe to do so.
I need to get back to the farm, Amanda. I was there a couple of years ago. Looking forward to it.
We'll put you to work.
Oh, no problem there. Awesome.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.